Complex post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it? And do you have it? This is Shores of Infinity with your host Chris, today about PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder, or even the complex form of it. You don't need to be a soldier or be a war or catastrophe victim to have PTSD. Actually, a horrible childhood is quite enough. And I have found out over the years, or decades, that not all, but many on the spiritual path had a horrible childhood. And of those, not all, but many, do have some form and severity of PTSD. They're different severities, of course. Not everyone has equally strong PTSD or complex PTSD. Complex PTSD means you've been traumatized several times by several things. For example, you've been raped several times or so. Several horrible things happen to you and they have compounded and complexified, is that even a word? Complexified the stress disorder. Syndrome is better, I think. Stress syndrome sounds better than disorder. Although there is also a disorder. Internally there is a big disorder, of course. Things are jumbled. And also the way you feel and perceive are jumbled, both internally and externally. It's difficult for you to feel what the fuck is going on inside and also to have a clear impression of what the heck is going on outside. One early symptom may be that as a child already you may have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, ADS or ADHS, with hyperactivity on top of it. Or maybe if you're my age or older, then no one knew about this, but you had it anyway. You were very jittery as a child and could not concentrate well. Or maybe you have or had legasthenia or some other form of that. You couldn't read well, write well, calculate well, zoning out. I'm just now reading Isaac's book on Elon Musk, which is very interesting. So this guy definitely had or has PTSD and knows that he has it. And there are at least two different types of how to react to it. Some don't get anything together in their life, and some go into hyperactive mode. He definitely went into hyperactive mode. But this example is just to show you that PTSD doesn't necessarily make you unable to do anything or to accomplish anything. To the contrary, the opposite can also be the case. Very likely, if you have a stronger form of PTSD, then very likely you have been diagnosed with something like depression or manic depression at some point in your life. Or maybe you diagnosed yourself by reading up symptoms. And then nowadays, many doctors and psychologists are more than ready to prescribe you medications like antidepressants for this, which will not help, or not much. They will help to some degree because they dull you down. They dull down everything you feel. So of course, if you feel less, you also feel less traumatized. But it's not a solution and it's not a healing. It's not a therapy. It's only a amelioration. Plus, you don't have depression or mania or manic depression or schizophrenia or whatever other psychological illness. You may have the symptoms, but not the disease, because underlying is this complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. The word stress comes from materials. If you put a material under enough stress, duress, then it might break or bend. And this is exactly how it feels like something is broken inside. and you're trying all the time to fix it, but you can't. So what I recommend, as you know, is to do trauma therapy. It really, really helps. The more I learn about trauma therapy, the more I'm convinced of it, that you can get somewhere with it. And why am I talking about it on this channel? Because on the way to enlightenment, it's necessary to fix some old wounds, to bind some old wounds, to get real medication, not just drugs that you have been prescribed or that you are prescribing yourself. The most common, of course, are alcohol and tobacco. Tobacco is one of the strongest tranquilizers that there is. It really calms you down. This is, for me, the main reason why so many people are smoking. It's a holy plant. And it's a medicine. Not the other stuff the tobacco industry mixes into the cigarettes, but the plant itself. It's a strong medicine. Strong calming down effect. But any other kind of addictions also, addiction is also a sign, or can be a sign, of PTSD. Any kind of addiction, sex addiction, game addiction, you name it. Even looking on your cell phone or at your cell phone every few minutes, that's a new thing. Especially with children, they're like companions. And you may have noticed that you cannot just decide not to be addicted. And if you do, then probably one addiction is replaced by another. Because the underlying cause is not addressed, and the underlying cause may very well be complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. And there is no medication for that. But there is trauma therapy for that. And with trauma therapy, I'm not talking about analysis, about talking therapies. You cannot talk your way out of it. To the contrary, the more you talk about it, the worse it can get. Because you're repeating your story again and again and again. You need to feel inside, not to think or to talk. On top of it, you might also be poisoned by something, being it heavy metals or plastic or herbicides or pesticides or whatever. This also needs to be addressed. If this is the case, because, for example, we know that heavy metal poisoning and plastic poisoning has the same symptoms. A follower and listener of this channel works at the university and does research in this direction. And just for fun, he measured his heavy metals or metals in general in his blood and was totally surprised. He didn't even have any symptoms and he was totally poisoned. So this is another reason why it's called complex PTSD, because there are so many facets to it. So consider if this may be an option for you. It might well be worth it. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for liking and subscribing and joining me on Patreon, and thanks to those who have already joined me on Patreon, where there are more posts regularly. So thank you to Sam, Alan, Patrick, Brittany, Chris, Enda, Raghu, Thomas, Marcus, Alex, Tyler, Alex, Gregory, Goshen, Kelly, Patricia, Mark, Björn, Brian, Robert, Matthias, Morgan, Feike, Bob, Cyan, Ophie, Andre, Chris, Tamash, Robina, Kim, Gabriel, Daniel, and Carrie. And a little bonus for those who listen until the end. Another symptom of complex PTSD might be that you have weird physical sensations or weird visions of stuff or beings.